Have you ever watched someone get judged before they even had the chance to speak? At one graduation ceremony, a teacher publicly embarrassed a black single father and took away his place of honor because she believed he didn't belong there. But what she didn't know was that the quiet man she humiliated had secretly funded every scholarship, keeping those students' dreams alive. By the time the truth came out, an entire community would be forced to question how easily appearances can deceive, and why the kindest people are often the ones we notice the least. The June sun settled over Franklin Ridge High School like a warm spotlight, filling the football stadium with golden light as families searched for seats and graduates straightened their blue caps one last time. Laughter drifted through the air, cameras flashed from every direction, and the school band tuned their instruments while proud parents waved toward the field. Caleb Brooks stepped through the front gate a little out of breath. His faded work jacket still carried a fine dusting of steel filings that glittered whenever the sunlight caught them. One sleeve bore a dark stain from machine oil that hadn't come out in the wash. He glanced at his watch, then toward the field where rows of graduates waited behind the stage. "There you are," the volunteer at the welcome table said with a smile after checking a clipboard. "Mr. Brooks?" Caleb nodded. She handed him a silver guest credential attached to a navy ribbon. "Please have a seat in the reserved section." "Thank you." He slipped the ribbon over his neck without looking at it, offering the woman the same quiet smile he seemed to save for strangers. Across the stadium, 18-year-old Avery Brooks spotted her father entering through the crowd. Even from a distance, she recognized the familiar jacket immediately. She smiled. He made it. She had worried the emergency call from his shop would keep him away. Caleb lifted one hand just enough for her to notice. Nothing dramatic, just enough to tell his daughter, "I'm here." Avery let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then someone stepped into Caleb's path. Elaine Whitaker. The school's college and career counselor stood perfectly pressed in a cream-colored blazer, greeting invited guests near the reserved seating. She looked down at the silver credential around Caleb's neck before letting her eyes travel slowly over his dusty jacket, worn work boots, and rough hands. Her smile disappeared. "Excuse me," she said, extending her hand. "May I see your pass?" Caleb unclipped the credential and handed it over without hesitation. Elaine studied it for barely a second. "There seems to be a mistake." Caleb frowned politely. "I received it at the front table. I'm sure someone mixed these up." Her voice grew louder as nearby conversations faded. "The reserved section is for scholarship sponsors, district officials, and honored guests." Several parents turned to look. Caleb remained calm. "I was told to sit here." Elaine folded the ribbon over in her hand. "The family seating for financial assistance recipients is behind Section D." The words landed harder than she intended, or perhaps exactly as she intended. A few uncomfortable glances passed through the crowd. Someone lowered a camera. Another parent quietly pulled a child a little closer. On the field, Avery couldn't hear every word, but she saw Elaine take the silver pass from her father's hand. She saw her father's shoulders remain perfectly still. She saw people staring. Her smile vanished. "Dad," she whispered to herself. Back near the aisle, Caleb spoke softly. "I believe there's been some confusion." Elaine shook her head. "No, Mr. Brooks. We work very hard to make today special for the people who support this program." She looked again at his jacket. "I can't allow anyone to enter the reserved section without proper authorization." Without another word, she slipped the credential into the folder she was carrying. It wasn't simply refused. It was taken. For one brief moment, silence settled between them. Caleb slowly placed one hand inside his jacket pocket. His fingers rested against a small brass pocket watch. Its surface was smooth from years of use. He didn't open it. He simply held it there, as though touching it steadied something inside him. Avery had already stepped away from the line of graduates. One more step, and she would have reached the stairs leading toward the audience. Caleb caught her eye across the stadium. Almost imperceptibly, he shook his head. Not now. She stopped, confusion mixed with hurt across her face. Why wasn't he saying anything? Why wasn't he defending himself? Caleb looked back at Elaine. "If that's where you want me to sit," he said quietly, "I'll sit there." He turned without another word. Every step toward the back rows felt longer than the last. The applause from another family echoed through the stadium while Caleb found an empty folding chair near the highest section of the bleachers, far from the guests of honor. He sat down alone. Below him, Avery remained frozen in place, unable to focus on the ceremony waiting to begin. She had never seen her father embarrassed. Not like this. She also knew one thing with absolute certainty. If Caleb Brooks accepted humiliation without arguing, there had to be a reason no one else in that stadium could possibly see. Least of all, the woman still holding the silver credential she believed never belonged to him. The applause rolling across Franklin Ridge's stadium faded into the background as Caleb sat quietly in the last row, his eyes fixed on the graduates instead of the people whispering around him. This wasn't the first time someone had judged him before learning his name. It probably wouldn't be the last. A week earlier, the sounds around him had been very different. Not marching bands, hydraulic presses, forklifts backing through loading bays. The sharp hiss of welding torches echoed through Brooks Fabrication, a modest steel shop tucked inside an aging industrial park outside Pittsburgh. Caleb walked the floor before sunrise every morning. Not because he had to. Because he refused to ask anyone else to start a shift, he wouldn't work himself. "You should replace this bearing before Friday," he told one of his machinists, kneeling beside an aging press. "If it gives out during production, it'll cost us 2 days." His employee nodded. "You notice everything." Caleb smiled faintly. "I've learned the expensive way." The shop wasn't large. 12 employees, one office, a break room with mismatched chairs, coffee that everyone complained about but still drank. Every paycheck mattered. So did every contract. Caleb had built the business one repaired machine at a time after losing far more than he ever expected. 10 years earlier, the hospital where Naomi spent her final weeks had become a place he couldn't drive past without tightening his grip on the steering wheel. Cancer hadn't only taken his wife, it had taken the future they thought they were building together. After the funeral, people brought casseroles. Neighbors offered help. Friends promised to check in. Most of them slowly disappeared. The mortgage remained. The medical bills remained. A frightened 8-year-old daughter remained. Caleb stayed. Every morning. Every evening. Every school concert. Every parent conference he could reach before the doors closed. Sometimes he arrived wearing clean clothes. Sometimes, like today, work won the race against time. That wasn't because he cared less. It was because too many people depended on him to simply walk away. Around noon that same week, his office phone rang. Brooks Fabrication. "This is Principal Harris from Franklin Ridge." Caleb closed the shop door behind him. "Good afternoon. I wanted to confirm we're still following your instructions." A pause. "Everything stays anonymous." Caleb looked through the office window toward his crew loading steel beams onto a truck. "Yes." You'll receive recognition during graduation if you change your mind. I appreciate that. You've earned it. Caleb smiled to himself. No. There was kindness in his voice, but certainty too. The students earned it. When he hung up, he slipped his phone into his pocket just as Avery walked into the shop carrying 2 paper bags from the neighborhood diner. I brought lunch. The smell of grilled sandwiches instantly filled the office. You skipped yours again, didn't you? She asked. I'm eating now. She raised one eyebrow. You say that every time. Caleb laughed quietly. She had inherited Naomi's ability to detect half-truths almost instantly. As they ate together at the scarred wooden desk, Avery talked excitedly about graduation rehearsal. They finally picked the student speaker. You? She nodded. I think so. You think? They haven't officially announced it. Caleb smiled with unmistakable pride. I never had much doubt. She looked at him for a long moment. Dad. Did the principal need something? He reached for his coffee. Just graduation logistics. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Avery watched him carefully. Ever since her mother passed away, Caleb had developed a habit she understood but didn't like. Whenever life became difficult, he carried it alone. She wanted to ask another question. Instead, she let it go. Outside, a delivery truck backed toward the loading dock with a long warning beep. Inside the office, Caleb unconsciously reached into his jacket and rested his fingers against the old brass pocket watch. Its hands hadn't moved in years. Neither had the promise he had made the day Naomi died. A promise Avery still knew nothing about. The brass pocket watch had stopped at 3:17. For 10 years, Caleb had never repaired it. Not because he couldn't. He had rebuilt engines, restored antique machinery, and brought rusted steel back to life with his own hands. But some things weren't meant to start again until the right time. That afternoon, after Avery left for rehearsal, Caleb remained alone in the office. The factory floor hummed beyond the glass, but inside the small room, only the ticking wall clock broke the silence. He carefully opened the pocket watch, brushing his thumb across the faded inscription inside the lid. Make room for one more. Naomi had chosen those words, not for herself, for everyone else. Years earlier, while she was receiving chemotherapy, she insisted they volunteer every Thanksgiving at the neighborhood community kitchen. Even on the days she could barely stand, she would smile at strangers and quietly tell Caleb, no matter how full life feels, there's always room to help one more person. After she was gone, those words refused to leave him. 3 years ago, Avery came home unusually quiet. She dropped her backpack beside the kitchen table without saying a word. Everything okay? Caleb had asked. She nodded too quickly. Then, halfway through dinner, she finally spoke. My friend Lily isn't coming back next semester. Caleb looked up. Why? Her mom lost her job. They can't afford the enrollment deposit for college anymore. Avery stared at her untouched mashed potatoes. It's not fair. She worked harder than anyone. Caleb asked no more questions that night. The following afternoon, he quietly called the financial aid office using a payphone outside an auto parts store instead of his own cell phone. He never gave his name. He simply paid the balance. A week later, Avery burst through the front door. Dad! Lily gets to go. Caleb looked up from repairing an old lawnmower engine. That's wonderful. They said an anonymous donor helped. She laughed through happy tears. I wish people like that knew how much they changed someone's life. Caleb simply smiled. So do I. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it became the beginning. One student became 3. 3 became 7. Eventually, Principal Harris asked to meet the anonymous donor whose checks kept arriving every semester. Caleb agreed, but only under one condition: no plaques, no speeches, no photographs, no buildings named after him. If students ever discovered who paid their tuition, he wanted it to be because the truth served them, not because it honored him. Together, they created something larger than individual gifts: the Naomi Brooks Open Door Fund. Its symbol wasn't a family crest or a company logo. It was a simple steel doorway standing open. Hidden within its design was the outline of Naomi's pocket watch. Almost no one noticed. That was intentional. Back in the present, Caleb gently closed the watch and slipped it into his jacket as someone knocked on the office door. "Dad?" Avery leaned inside. "I forgot my graduation paperwork." He handed the folder to her with a warm smile. As she reached for it, her eyes caught a stack of cream-colored envelopes on the corner of his desk. Each carried the same small embossed symbol: an open door. "That's a nice design," she said casually. Caleb reacted almost instinctively. He placed another folder over the envelopes before she could look any closer. "Just paperwork for a school project." She accepted the answer, but only because she trusted him. As Avery drove away, Caleb watched her taillights disappear beyond the factory gate. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty parking lot. "One more week." He wasn't hiding the truth because he doubted his daughter. He was protecting something he believed belonged to every student standing on that graduation field. He had no idea that his silence would soon cost Avery far more than he ever intended. 3 days before graduation, Avery walked into the counseling office carrying a notebook filled with crossed-out sentences. The hallway outside buzzed with seniors comparing college plans, signing yearbooks, and promising to stay in touch. Inside Elaine Whitaker's office, everything felt orderly, polished, and strangely cold. Elaine looked up from her desk. "Perfect timing, Avery. Close the door, please." Avery did as she was asked. "I've reviewed your file," Elaine said, sliding a folder across the desk. "The committee agreed you'll represent this year's scholarship recipients." Avery blinked. "I'm honored." "You should be." Elaine reached into another folder and handed her several printed pages. "Here's your speech." Avery glanced down. The first sentence made her stomach tighten. "Should we stand here today because this school believed in students who couldn't succeed on their own?" She continued reading. Every paragraph painted scholarship students as people rescued by generosity instead of young adults who had spent years working, studying, sacrificing, and refusing to quit. When she reached the final page, she slowly lowered the papers. "I don't think this sounds like us." Elaine folded her hands. "What do you mean?" "It makes us sound helpless." "It makes you sound grateful." "We are grateful." Avery met her eyes. "But that's not the same thing." Elaine's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "The donors appreciate humility. My mom used to say accepting help doesn't erase what someone worked for." Elaine sighed. "This isn't a debate." She tapped the stack of pages. "This version has already been approved." Avery hesitated. "I already wrote something." "I'm sure you did." Elaine smiled politely. "But this ceremony isn't about personal opinions." She leaned forward. "The district will be watching. So will scholarship sponsors. And colleges." The room suddenly felt much smaller. "You understand how important impressions are at this stage of your life?" Avery looked down again. She wasn't being yelled at. She wasn't being threatened. But the meaning behind Elaine's words was impossible to miss. Then came the sentence that stayed with her long after she left. I'd hate to see unnecessary complications affect your scholarship records. Silence filled the office. Avery carefully gathered the printed pages. I'll think about it. I hope you make the responsible decision. Outside, the afternoon breeze carried the distant sound of baseball practice across campus. Avery walked slowly toward the student parking lot, the speech trembling slightly in her hand. An hour later, she found Caleb finishing paperwork at the shop. He looked up the moment she walked in. How'd rehearsal go? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed him the speech. He read only the first page before quietly setting it down. What do you think? She asked. Caleb chose his words carefully. What do you think? I think it tells people we're lucky. You are. She frowned. He smiled gently. But not because someone handed you a future. He looked directly at her. You're lucky because you never stopped working for one. Avery sat across from him. What if I refuse to read it? Caleb rested both hands on the worn wooden desk. Then make sure whatever you do read is true. What if people don't like it? He shrugged softly. The truth isn't measured by applause. She searched his face, hoping for something more. Aren't you going to tell me what to say? No. Why not? Because when you step onto that stage, his voice became almost a whisper. Those words need to belong to you. Avery nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in her eyes. As she left the office carrying both speeches, Caleb watched through the dusty window until her car disappeared beyond the gate. He believed honesty would be enough. 2 mornings before graduation, Franklin Ridge High School buzzed with the restless energy of students counting down their final hours together. Caps and gowns hung from classroom doors. Teachers hurried through last-minute checklists. Parents volunteered in the auditorium, arranging rows of folded programs that still smelled of fresh ink. Caleb arrived just before lunch. He wasn't there for Avery. Not this time. Principal Daniel Harris greeted him quietly through a side entrance. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Caleb noticed the concern on the principal's face. What's happened? Harris led him into a conference room where a single student sat staring at the floor. Jordan Price. Caleb recognized him immediately. Jordan had worked evenings at Miller's Grocery for nearly 2 years, often stocking shelves after football practice before biking home. The 17-year-old stood as Caleb entered. I'm sorry to bother you, sir. You didn't. Caleb pulled out a chair. What happened? Jordan swallowed hard. My scholarship was revoked. Caleb frowned. I thought recipients were already finalized. So did I. Jordan slid a letter across the table. The official explanation was brief. Failure to complete required counseling sessions. Principal Harris sighed. The paperwork is technically correct, but incomplete. Jordan lowered his eyes. My mom started working overnight shifts at Mercy Hospital. My little brother's 9. I had to stay home with him. I missed 2 appointments. His voice cracked with embarrassment. I figured someone would understand. Caleb remained silent for several seconds. He'd heard enough. What are your grades? Top 5%. Attendance? Perfect, except those meetings. Any disciplinary record? Jordan shook his head. None. Caleb looked toward Principal Harris. So one administrative requirement erased 4 years of work. The principal didn't argue. It shouldn't have. Before anyone spoke again, There was a knock at the door. Elaine Whitaker stepped inside carrying another folder. She stopped the moment she saw Caleb. I wasn't aware this meeting involved parents. Principal Harris answered calmly. Mr. Brooks requested to sit in. Elaine's eyebrows lifted. I appreciate community involvement, she said carefully, but scholarship decisions aren't open for negotiation. Caleb met her gaze. I'm not asking for special treatment. No? She glanced toward Jordan. Then what exactly are you asking? Caleb folded Jordan's letter and placed it neatly on the table. I'm asking whether your process leaves room for circumstances. Elaine answered without hesitation. Rules exist because every family believes their situation is unique. And sometimes they are. If we make exceptions, Caleb interrupted gently. I'm not asking for an exception. I'm asking for an appeal. The room fell quiet. Principal Harris looked at him thoughtfully. Elaine crossed her arms. Ma, the committee has already voted. Then let them review the complete file. Jordan finally looked up. Hope flickered across his face. Caleb continued. Include his work schedule, his mother's hospital shifts, the responsibility of caring for his brother. Then let the committee decide with all the facts. Elaine studied Caleb for a long moment. It bothered her how naturally he spoke, as though he belonged in administrative meetings, as though the principal actually valued his opinion. Finally, she gathered her folder. I'll notify the committee. Her tone remained polite, but the warmth was gone. After she left, Harris looked at Caleb. You know she won't like this? Caleb gave a tired smile. This isn't about being liked. It's about making sure the right student doesn't lose his future because the system forgot to ask one more question. Late that afternoon, the committee reconvened. Jordan's scholarship was reinstated. When the email arrived, the teenager stared at the screen in disbelief before quietly wiping tears from his face. Thank you, he whispered. Caleb shook his head. Don't thank me. You earned this long before any meeting happened. As Jordan left the building, clutching the letter, Elaine watched from the opposite end of the hallway. She wasn't focused on the student. She was watching Caleb, a machinist in dusty work boots, a father who somehow walked into the principal's office without an appointment, a man whose opinions seemed to carry unexpected weight. For the first time, a question settled into her mind. Who exactly was Caleb Brooks? And why did the principal listen every time he spoke? Those questions followed Elaine Whitaker long after she left the conference room. She prided herself on reading people quickly. Successful parents usually arrived in tailored suits. Business leaders introduced themselves before anyone else did. Major donors wanted their names on plaques, gym walls, or scholarship brochures. Caleb Brooks fit none of those patterns. Yet Principal Harris had listened to him with the kind of attention reserved for someone whose opinion mattered. Elaine didn't like mysteries. The next afternoon, she drove past the industrial district on her way home. Almost without thinking, she slowed as she passed Brooks Fabrication. The building was older than she expected. Faded brick, a weathered sign. Delivery trucks backed into loading bays while sparks flashed behind open garage doors. Nothing about it suggested wealth. Inside the shop, Caleb stood beside a steel workbench wearing heavy gloves and a welding mask. He carefully lifted a polished piece of metal from a clamp and brushed away the last traces of dust. The finished design resembled an open doorway. Simple, elegant, strong. He turned it slightly under the shop lights, checking every edge before giving a satisfied nod. Across the room, Avery walked in carrying 2 iced coffees. I figured you forgot to take a break. Caleb laughed. You know me too well. She handed him a cup before her eyes drifted toward the steel emblem. That's beautiful. He looked at it for a moment. It still needs a little work. It looks familiar. She stepped closer. The outline reminded her of something she couldn't quite place. An open door, clean lines. Almost ceremonial. Before she could study it any longer, Caleb gently lifted an old canvas dropcloth and covered the piece. It's just a custom order. For who? A client. His answer came too quickly. Avery noticed. She didn't press him. Lately, every time the school came up in conversation, there seemed to be another unfinished sentence hanging between them. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off the factory windows while Caleb changed the subject. Did you finish revising your speech? I did. And? She smiled faintly. I wrote what I believe. Good. I don't know if they'll let me read it. Caleb rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Whatever happens, don't let anyone convince you gratitude means giving away your dignity. She nodded. Those words stayed with her as she climbed back into her car. A few hours later, Caleb parked behind Franklin Ridge for a private meeting with Principal Harris. The graduation stage was already being assembled across the football field. Rows of empty folding chairs stretched beneath the evening sky. Inside the administration building, Harris reviewed the ceremony schedule. We still have time to acknowledge the donor. Caleb shook his head before the principal finished the sentence. No. You've stayed anonymous for 3 years. And I'd like to keep it that way. Harris smiled. You really don't want the credit. Caleb looked through the office window toward students decorating the stage with blue and silver ribbons. The graduation belongs to them. Not to the man writing the checks. At that exact moment, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Elaine had returned to collect paperwork she'd forgotten. As she passed the slightly open office door, she heard only fragments of the conversation. Keep it that way. The ceremony belongs to the students. Don't announce anything. She stopped walking. From where she stood, she couldn't hear the rest, but she didn't need to. Her mind filled in the missing pieces. She assumed Caleb was asking the principal for special treatment. Perhaps he wanted Avery highlighted during the ceremony. Perhaps he didn't want other parents questioning it. Elaine quietly stepped away before either man noticed her. By the time she reached the parking lot, her misunderstanding had hardened into certainty. She believed she finally understood Caleb Brooks, not as a generous father, not as a humble businessman, but as someone quietly using influence behind closed doors, and on graduation day. She decided she would make sure influence didn't matter. Graduation morning began long before sunrise. A cool mist hung over the industrial park as the lights inside Brooks Fabrication flickered on one by one. Caleb unlocked the front door at 5:30, expecting nothing more than a quick inspection before heading home to change into a clean shirt. Instead, he heard a sound every shop owner dreaded. A sharp metallic crack echoed across the building. Then silence. One of the hydraulic presses had stopped in the middle of a production run. Within minutes, 3 employees gathered around the machine, their worried faces reflecting the pale, fluorescent lights. It's locked up, Mike, the senior machinist, said. If we can't get it running today, the shipment misses its deadline. Caleb knelt beside the press, running his fingers across a fractured coupling. He didn't need a second look. The part had failed. How long? Mike asked. If we order a replacement, 3 days. Mike slowly removed his gloves. My wife starts chemo again Monday. The words hung in the air. Another employee, Rosa, quietly added, "I'm already behind on rent. If today's hours get canceled." No one finished the sentence. They didn't have to. Caleb looked toward the clock on the wall. 7:18 a.m. Graduation check-in began in less than an hour. He had promised Avery he would be early. For a brief moment he imagined driving away. He could leave the repair to someone else. He could arrive in clean clothes, sit proudly in the front row, and watch his daughter graduate without another worry. Then he looked back at the men and women standing around him. These weren't just employees. Mike had coached Avery's Little League team after Naomi passed away. Rosa had brought casseroles to their house the first Christmas Caleb spent alone with his daughter. Each family depended on today's paycheck. Caleb quietly rolled up his sleeves. "We're fixing it." For the next 90 minutes, the factory became a blur of movement. Wrenches clanged against concrete. Compressed air hissed through the shop. Grease stained Caleb's hands as he machined a temporary replacement from a block of hardened steel left over from another project. By the time the repaired coupling slid into place, sweat soaked through the back of his work shirt. Mike hit the power switch. The machine shuddered once, then roared back to life. The entire shop erupted in applause. "You saved us," Rosa said, wiping tears from her eyes. Caleb smiled, exhausted. "No." He picked up his jacket from a nearby chair. "We saved each other." He glanced at his phone. 2 missed calls from Avery. 1 unread message. "Dad, are you on your way?" His heart tightened. "I'm leaving now." He hurried into the office, splashed water across his face in the small restroom, and changed into the only clean button-down shirt he kept hanging behind the door. But there wasn't time to replace the jacket. The sleeves still carried faint gray streaks of steel dust. His boots still bore traces of oil from the factory floor. He grabbed Naomi's pocket watch from the desk, slipped it carefully into his inside pocket, and rushed outside. The old pickup truck started on the second turn of the key. Traffic thickened as families headed toward Franklin Ridge. Every red light seemed longer than the last. When Caleb finally pulled into the school's parking lot, volunteers were already directing guests toward the stadium entrance. He checked the time. Late. Not by much, but enough. As he hurried toward the gate, a smiling volunteer searched the guest list. "Mr. Caleb Brooks?" "Yes." "There you are." She handed him a silver credential attached to a navy ribbon. "We've been expecting you." "Thank you." He barely had time to slip it over his neck before jogging toward the reserved seating. Across the field, Avery spotted him and smiled with relief. He had made it. At nearly the same moment, Elaine Whitaker turned from the entrance and noticed a man in dusty work boots wearing a silver credential meant for honored guests. Her eyes narrowed. She stepped directly into his path. "Excuse me, sir," she said, extending her hand toward the ribbon around his neck. "I'm going to need to see that pass." And with that single decision, the hardest morning Caleb Brooks had endured in years was only beginning. Elaine held out her hand. "The credential, please." Caleb unclipped the silver ribbon without hesitation and placed it in her palm. "I received it at the front gate." Elaine barely glanced at it before looking back at the oil stains on his sleeves. "I'm sure you did." Her voice carried farther than she realized. "But this credential isn't for family seating." Several nearby conversations stopped. Parents waiting to enter the reserved section turned toward them. Caleb kept his tone calm. "The volunteer checked my name." "There must have been a mistake." Elaine folded the ribbon once. The honored section is reserved for scholarship sponsors, district officials, and invited guests. She looked toward the back of the stadium. Families receiving financial assistance are seated behind Section D. The words hung in the warm morning air. A woman standing nearby lowered the program she had been reading. A father quietly looked away. No one stepped forward. No one interrupted. From the graduates' staging area, Avery couldn't hear every sentence, but she saw Elaine take the silver credential from her father's hand. Then she saw people staring. Her stomach dropped. "Dad!" She instinctively stepped out of line. Another graduate reached for her arm. "They're calling us. I have to go." She took another step toward the stairs leading into the stands. Across the stadium, Caleb finally looked up and found her. Their eyes met. He gave the smallest shake of his head. "No. Stay where you are." Avery froze. She knew that look. It was the same expression he wore every time life became heavier than he wanted anyone else to see. Elaine tucked the credential into her event folder. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks. These policies exist for a reason." Caleb nodded once. "I understand." He didn't, but arguing would accomplish nothing. Not here. Not today. He slipped one hand inside his jacket pocket. His fingers found Naomi's old pocket watch. The brass felt cool against his skin despite the growing heat. Without opening it, he gently traced the engraved edge with his thumb. Make room for one more. For one brief moment, another voice echoed in his memory. Naomi laughing in their tiny kitchen. "Promise me something." "What?" "If life ever gives you a chance to protect someone's joy, don't let your pride become the loudest voice in the room." Caleb slowly released the watch. This ceremony wasn't about him. Hundreds of parents had waited years for this morning. Dozens of students had overcome obstacles no one else would ever know. If he challenged Elaine now, the celebration would become an argument. Avery would remember headlines instead of graduation. He couldn't do that to her. "I'll find another seat." Elaine gave a short nod. "I appreciate your cooperation." Caleb turned without another word. Each step toward the upper bleachers seemed to echo louder than the last. Whispers followed him. Was he trying to sneak in? I guess they caught it. Poor guy. No one knew the truth. They only saw a tired man in work clothes walking away from the section where he apparently didn't belong. Caleb reached the highest row and quietly sat in an empty folding chair. From there, the stage looked much farther away. The breeze carried fragments of music from the school band below. He could just make out Avery's face among the rows of blue graduation gowns. She wasn't looking toward the principal. She wasn't looking at her classmates. She was looking only at him. Her eyes filled with confusion, not because he had been embarrassed, because he had accepted it. For the first time in her life, she couldn't understand her father. Down near the entrance, Elaine straightened the stack of guest credentials in her folder. She felt oddly satisfied. She believed she had protected the integrity of the ceremony. She never questioned whether she had misunderstood the man she had just sent away. High above the crowd, Caleb rested both hands on the closed pocket watch inside his jacket. Its hands still pointed to 3:17, just as they had for 10 years. He whispered so quietly that no one around him could hear. "Just a little longer, Naomi." Then the opening music began, and somewhere beneath the stage, Avery made a decision that would change the rest of the ceremony. The first notes of pomp and circumstance floated across the stadium as rows of graduates stepped onto the field. Families rose to their feet. Phones filled the air. Names, Laughter and applause blended into one unforgettable morning. Avery walked with the rest of her class, but she barely noticed the music. Her eyes searched the upper rows until she found her father sitting alone beneath the highest section of the bleachers. He looked smaller from that distance, not because of where he sat, because no one around him knew who he truly was. She remembered every late-night ride home from basketball practice, every science project he helped build after working 12-hour shifts, every birthday cake that leaned a little because he insisted on baking it himself instead of buying one. She had never once seen him ask for recognition, and now she had watched him accept humiliation without defending himself. Nothing about it made sense. The graduates took their seats. Elaine moved confidently along the edge of the stage, checking programs and greeting district officials as though nothing unusual had happened. When she caught Avery looking toward the bleachers, she walked over. "Remember," Elaine said quietly, handing her the printed speech one final time. "We'll call you after the scholarship presentation." Avery accepted the papers without speaking. "You understand how important today is." "I do. I trust you'll make the right decision." Elaine offered a practiced smile before moving on to the next student. The moment she disappeared, Avery folded the printed speech in half, then in half again. She slipped it into her graduation gown without reading another word. A few minutes later, the ceremony paused while families applauded another group of graduates. Avery quietly stepped away from her seat and walked behind the stage. She found the narrow staircase leading toward the upper bleachers. Caleb saw her coming before she reached him. "You should be down there," he said gently. "I needed to see you." She sat beside him without asking. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The cheers from below sounded strangely distant. Finally, Avery broke the silence. "Why didn't you stop her?" Caleb looked toward the field. "Because today isn't about me. It became about you the moment she embarrassed you." "I'm all right." "No, you're not." Her voice cracked. "You've spent my whole life teaching me to stand up for what's right. So why didn't you stand up for yourself?" Caleb took a slow breath. "If I had argued, everyone would remember the confrontation. They deserve to remember graduation." Avery shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "I don't care about graduation. I care about you." He turned toward her. "I know." "No, Dad." She wiped at her face. "I was ready to walk off that field." His expression changed. "What?" "I don't want their scholarship. I don't want their speech. I don't even want my diploma if it comes at the cost of your dignity." Caleb's heart sank. He reached for her hand. "Avery." She pulled a folded envelope from inside her gown, the scholarship acceptance paperwork. "I won't sign it." He gently closed her fingers around it. "Listen to me." His voice remained calm, but every word carried quiet conviction. "That scholarship doesn't belong to the people who judged me. It belongs to every late night you spent studying, every paper you rewrote, every dream your mother believed you'd reach. It belongs to you." She looked into his eyes. "Then tell me what you're protecting." The question hung between them. For the first time, Caleb almost told her everything. His fingers drifted toward the pocket watch beneath his jacket. He could end the mystery now. He could explain every meeting with Principal Harris, every hidden envelope, every secret. Instead, he slowly lowered his hand. "Not yet." Pain flashed across Avery's face. "You still don't trust me." "That's not true." "Then why won't you let me carry this with you?" Before Caleb could answer, The loudspeaker echoed across the stadium. "Student speaker Avery Brooks, please report backstage." She stood without another word. I wrote my own speech. Caleb managed a faint smile. "I know you did. I don't know if they'll let me read it." He looked at her with quiet pride. "Whatever happens, don't speak to please the room. Speak so you can still respect yourself tomorrow." Avery nodded slowly. Then she walked back toward the stage, carrying 2 speeches, one written by Elaine and one written from her own heart. Only one of them would be heard before the morning was over. Avery disappeared behind the stage curtains just as Principal Harris walked to the podium. The stadium settled into a respectful silence. A warm breeze stirred the rows of blue and silver banners, while proud families leaned forward, waiting for the scholarship presentation to begin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Principal Harris began, "before we award this year's scholarships, I'd like to tell you a story." Elaine stood confidently near the side of the stage, her clipboard tucked beneath one arm. She expected to be introduced next. After all, she had coordinated the scholarship program for years. Instead, the lights behind the stage dimmed. The large screen flickered to life. A simple image appeared, an open steel doorway. Inside its outline rested the faint silhouette of a pocket watch. Caleb looked up from the highest row. His hand instinctively slipped into his jacket. His fingers closed around Naomi's watch. Across the field, Avery stared at the screen. She had seen that symbol before, on the envelope sitting on her father's desk, on the steel piece covered by the canvas cloth inside the shop. Her heartbeat quickened. Principal Harris continued. 3 years ago, someone in this community quietly paid a college deposit for one graduating senior. No announcement, no publicity, no recognition. The following year, that same anonymous donor funded several scholarships. And today, he paused, looking across the crowd. That generosity has become 18 full first-year scholarships, covering tuition assistance, books, and enrollment costs. A murmur spread through the stadium. Parents exchanged surprised looks. Students whispered to one another. Elaine frowned. This wasn't the order of events she had approved. "The donor made only one request," Principal Harris said. "No student would ever be asked to publicly explain their hardship in order to deserve compassion. They believed opportunity should protect dignity, not expose pain." Several scholarship recipients lowered their heads, wiping away quiet tears. Jordan Price looked toward the bleachers, remembering the meeting that had restored his future. Elaine slowly turned. Her eyes searched the crowd. Then they stopped, high above the field. On Caleb, for the first time, she noticed the brass pocket watch resting in his hand. The image on the screen. The emblem she had seen in his workshop. The symbol embossed on the scholarship envelopes. Every forgotten detail suddenly connected. Her face lost its color. Principal Harris unfolded one final card. "It is my privilege to thank the founder of the Naomi Brooks Open Door Fund." He looked toward the upper bleachers instead of the front row. "Mr. Caleb Brooks." Silence. Then hundreds of heads turned together. Not toward the honored guest section, not toward the district officials, toward the man sitting alone in the highest row, still wearing a work jacket marked with steel dust. Avery's eyes filled instantly. She didn't move. She couldn't. The truth crashed over her all at once. Every late night, every unexplained meeting, every hidden envelope, every conversation that ended too soon. Her father hadn't been receiving help. He had been quietly creating it. Below the stage, Elaine's hands began to tremble. The silver credential she had taken from Caleb still rested inside her event folder. Only now did she understand why it had been issued. Not by mistake, by right. The stadium remained perfectly still. Everyone waited to see whether the quiet man in the back row would finally stand. Caleb slowly rose to his feet. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He simply held Naomi's pocket watch close to his heart as every eye in Franklin Ridge turned toward him. And for the first time that morning, no one saw a man in dirty work clothes. They saw the man who had opened 18 doors without ever asking anyone to know his name. For several long seconds, the stadium remained completely silent. Then someone in the back began to clap, one pair of hands, then another. Within moments, the applause spread through the stands like a rising tide. Parents stood, teachers stood, students stood. The ovation rolled across Franklin Ridge until nearly every person in the stadium was on their feet. Caleb looked overwhelmed. He placed one hand over the pocket watch resting inside his jacket and gave a small shake of his head, as if trying to tell everyone they were applauding the wrong person. Principal Harris smiled. "They're not thanking you for writing checks," he said into the microphone. "They're thanking you for believing that every student deserves a chance before anyone asks about their circumstances." The applause grew louder. High above the field, Caleb finally started down the bleacher steps. He moved slowly, greeting no one, acknowledging no praise beyond a humble nod. Several parents reached out to shake his hand. Others quietly stepped aside to let him pass. The whispers that had followed him earlier had disappeared. Now they were replaced by very different words. "That's him. The scholarship donor. I had no idea." Near the front of the stadium, Jordan Price left his seat without waiting for permission. As Caleb reached the walkway, Jordan stopped in front of him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jordan wrapped both arms around him. "Thank you," he whispered. Caleb gently patted the young man's shoulder. "I already told you once." Jordan smiled through tears. "I earned it." "You did. And now make the most of it." Jordan nodded. "I will." Only a few feet away, Elaine Whitaker stood frozen beside the stage. The silver credential still rested inside her folder. It suddenly felt heavier than anything she had ever carried. She walked toward Caleb, her steps hesitant. The confidence that had defined her all morning was gone. When she reached him, she held out the credential with both hands. "I'm so sorry." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I judged you before I knew you." Caleb accepted the ribbon, but didn't place it around his neck. Instead, he folded it once and held it loosely in his hand. "We all make quick judgments sometimes." Elaine lowered her eyes. "I embarrassed you in front of your daughter and in front of this community. I can't take that back." "No," Caleb answered softly. "You can't." The words were honest. Not cruel, just true. Elaine felt tears gathering despite every effort to remain composed. "I thought I was protecting fairness." Caleb looked toward the rows of graduates waiting patiently beneath the morning sun. Fairness begins with seeing people, not assuming you already have. Those words struck her harder than any public criticism could have. She nodded once, unable to answer. Principal Harris stepped forward again. "We still have one student speaker." He looked toward backstage. Avery Brooks. The audience applauded as Avery walked slowly to the podium. She carried two folded speeches. She placed both on the wooden lectern. For a brief moment, she looked at the prepared remarks Elaine had written. Then she quietly set those pages aside. The breeze caught them. They slipped from the podium and drifted gently across the stage. Avery unfolded the pages she had written herself. She searched the crowd until she found her father standing near the front. Their eyes met. He gave the same gentle nod he had given her all her life whenever she doubted herself. Not permission, trust. Avery smiled through tears. She adjusted the microphone, took one slow breath, and began speaking, not as the student everyone expected, but as the daughter of the man who had quietly changed hundreds of lives without ever asking the world to notice. Avery stood quietly behind the microphone. The breeze lifted a strand of her hair as she looked across the sea of familiar faces. For a moment, she forgot every sentence she had practiced. Then she saw her father, still standing, still holding the old brass pocket watch close to his heart. She smiled. "When I was little," she began, "I thought my dad could fix anything." A warm laugh rippled through the audience. "If our kitchen chair broke, he fixed it. If my bicycle chain came off, he fixed it. If I thought I had failed a math test, he somehow fixed my confidence before he ever looked at my homework." More laughter. Then her voice softened. "What I didn't understand was that he spent his life fixing things no one else could see." The stadium grew still. He fixed hope. He fixed broken confidence. He fixed futures that were about to slip away. She glanced toward the scholarship recipients seated together in the front rows. And he never asked anyone to know his name. Avery paused before reaching into the pocket of her graduation gown. She unfolded one small piece of paper. Not the speech she had written. A note. One she had found years ago tucked inside an old family Bible after her mother's funeral. She had carried it with her ever since. "My mom wrote something before she passed away." She took a careful breath. "I didn't understand it then. I do now." Her voice trembled as she read. "If you ever have more than you need, make room for one more." Across the field, Caleb slowly closed his eyes. Those were Naomi's words, the same words engraved inside the pocket watch, the same words that had quietly guided every scholarship. Avery looked back at her father. "I spent years wondering why he was always late. Late to dinners, late to school events, late to birthday parties. I thought work always came first." She smiled through tears. "I was wrong. People came first. Families came first. Someone else's child came first. And somehow, he still made me feel like I had never come second." Parents throughout the stadium wiped away tears. Teachers looked toward students sitting beside them. Many scholarship recipients quietly reached for the hands of their mothers or fathers. Avery looked back across the audience. "I almost refused my scholarship today. I almost walked away because I believed accepting it would dishonor my father." She shook her head gently. "But he reminded me that dignity isn't something another person can give us. And it isn't something another person can take away. It comes from choosing kindness when bitterness would be easier." She turned toward Elaine. The counselor stood silently beside the stage, tears resting openly on her cheeks. Avery offered her a small, sincere smile. "We all make mistakes. The important question is what we choose after we recognize them." Elaine lowered her head. Not in shame, in humility. Avery faced the crowd once more. "And if every one of us leaves here today determined to open just one door for someone else, then this graduation won't end when we receive our diplomas. It will begin. The stadium remained silent for one breathtaking heartbeat. Then applause erupted. Not loud at first. Deep, steady, grateful. Principal Harris stepped beside Caleb and quietly handed him the silver credential once more. This time, Caleb clipped it around his neck, not because he finally accepted recognition, but because refusing it would take attention away from the students one last time. He opened Naomi's pocket watch. The hands still rested at 3:17. They always would. His thumb traced the familiar engraving. Make room for one more. He looked toward the graduates crossing the stage, toward Avery, toward Jordan, toward 18 students whose futures had stretched wider because one quiet promise had never been forgotten. Then he smiled, not because the community finally knew what he had done, but because Naomi's kindness had found hundreds of new hearts willing to carry it forward. And in that moment, Caleb Brooks realized something beautiful. The greatest legacy was never the doors he had opened. It was the people who would now open them for someone else. When Caleb Brooks quietly closed Naomi's pocket watch one last time, he wasn't celebrating that the truth had finally come out. He was honoring a promise that had guided every unseen act of generosity, even when no one was watching. Some of the most important people in our lives may never ask for applause, a title, or even a simple thank you. This story reminds us that the greatest gifts are often given in silence, and the people changing the world are sometimes the ones we notice the least. Today, think about one person who has quietly made your life better without expecting anything in return. Reach out, say thank you, or pay that kindness forward to someone else, just as Caleb Brooks did, one life at a time. If this story stayed with you, comment 1 below. I'd also love to know, have you ever discovered that someone had been helping others in secret for years? Share your story in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video with another unforgettable story that might change the way you see the people around you.